Did you notice that this show doesn't have any commercials? I'm not selling you diapers or vitamins or smoothies or gasoline. That's because I don't want corporate sponsors telling us what to investigate and what to say. Instead, you're our sponsors. This is a production by our nonprofit, the Informed Consent Action Network. If you want more investigations, more hard-hitting news, if you want the truth, go to ICanDecide.org and donate now. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Wherever you are out there in the world, it's time to step out onto the high wire. Well, you know, when I look at the stories, just last week we were doing a story on the Penta vaccine, how it's killing up to 10 times the amount of girls compared to boys. And I know the work that we've done to try and stop the DTP vaccine after the great work by Peter Abe has been done, and children are dying at, 2 times the rate, 5 times the rate, 10 times the rate of those that didn't receive the vaccine. You can't help but ask yourself, what is going on here? Do these people care about people and children? You know, what is the real agenda? And as I was running through that in my mind, there was one video that really just popped into my head. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. This is our good friend, Bill Gates, and his TED Talk. Listen to this.
Now, the world today has 6.8 billion people. That's headed up to about 9 billion. Now, if we do a really great job on new vaccines, healthcare, reproductive health services, we could lower that by perhaps 10 or 15%.
Through the use of modern medicine and vaccines, we could lower population by 10 to 15%. Now, of course, so many people have shared this video, and then there was this huge outcry saying Bill Gates didn't mean that. He didn't mean, he wanted to, take people out using vaccines and medicine. It was, that wasn't his point. Well, he's had multiple opportunities to really clarify what he means, and we found that there's many videos to pick from, but listen to this one. Let's go ahead and just let him clarify what he actually means.
Melinda and I take the toughest questions we get asked and give our answers. One that's come up for a long time is, as we make the world healthier, is the population going to get so big that feeding everybody and maintaining the environment is going to be impossible? Here we can see a chart that looks at the total world population over the last several hundred years. And at first glance, this is a bit scary. We go from less than 1 billion in 1800, and then 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7.4 billion where we are today is happening even faster. So Melinda and I wondered whether providing new medicines and keeping children alive, would that create more of a population problem? What we found out is that as health improves, families choose to have less children. And this effect is very, very dramatic. We find that in every country of the world, this is repeated. The population growth goes down as we improve health. So we've taken that chart that shows the global population growth, and we've actually extended it out all the way to 2100. And we can see that instead of continuing, it actually flattens out. Another way to see that is through this rate of population growth. And you can see that in the 60s, that reached a pretty high number, over 2% per year, and it's now come way, way down. Now, 11 billion people, still a lot, but the good news is that the faster we improve health, the faster family size goes down, and so we can feel great about saving those lives.
It's amazing, right? I mean, talk about, verbal salad or whatever you want to call it. Let's just be clear. It's clear now, I think, and we've given Bill Gates the opportunity, he really want to explain himself, but it's clear that his goal is to reduce population. His goal is to have less of you alive out there on this planet, right? I don't think I'm taking that out of context when I say that. And so, he says, when we look at populations in areas where you could go ahead and assume tend to be darker skinned people, let's say, that population could really use to be reduced. And through the use of vaccines, and he says, you know, when we look at, you know, in first world nation, everywhere we look where there's better, you know, the population goes down when the health improves, like the United States of America, right? I'm guessing he's pointing to us where our health improved, where we went from 12.8% chronic illness in our children in the 1980s till we brought all these great vaccines and drugs, and now we've improved to 54% of our children have chronic illness, autoimmune disease, neurological disorders. Oh, and by the way, our population has gone down too. How many of your friends cannot have children? How many people do you know need to be rich enough to use intervention of IVF or other forms of impregnating themselves because nature is no longer working? You see, that's Bill Gates' dream. He dreams to do that to every nation. And we've seen vaccines that kill when we talked about DTP last week. We've seen vaccines that sterilize being kicked out of, you know, India in vaccination programs, that Bill and Melinda Gates and the Clinton Foundation were there. But, you know, whether or not these seem like conspiracy theories to you or wherever you're at, just remember, as the leading voice, honestly, the first man who screamed, this is the once-in-a-lifetime pandemic. This is the big one. This is the once-in-a-century virus. We must lock everyone down. We must destroy economies. We must make sure that no one has any freedom until we can get a vaccine that 7.5 billion of you will get. The man screaming that is telling you his number one goal is to make fewer of you. Just keep that in your mind as we move through today's show and start to ask even more questions about whether or not you think better health leads to fewer people. I'm just saying, something you may want to think about. To get to the bottom of what's happened this week and more stories just like those that Bill Gates loves, let's get to the Jackson Report. Well, Jeffrey Jackson, Bill Gates, man, that is really quite a use of words. We're making the world a better place by making fewer of you. Drugs and vaccines are there to reduce the population. Okay, got it.
11.
Right.
11 million people. Still a lot of people, he says.
Still a lot of, still too many, right? Too many. In fact, I think he would agree that's like too many right now. What can we do about it? And when you think about it, right? Think about how long that would actually take. Let's say he's right. Let's say that, you know, people in Africa and these lesser developed nations are simply having children that can take care of them, and that's why they're doing it. I mean, what are we talking? 80? How many would you need? Like 2 generations to go, you know what? I got 22 kids because we're so healthy now, and none of them are dying because vaccines are so great. As though that's what's going to happen, right? And they'll say, we just got to back off on, you know, on the extracurricular activities that are ending in all these children. Let's have fewer of them. The whole thing just, even if it did work, it would take 80 years or 100 years. And where are we at by then? But, however, he is right, and it's much faster, right, if the vaccines just kill children. If the vaccines just sterilize women, then I think you see, like, right, you just in the next few years, right, that's the only way you get there. The vaccine is actually going to have to itself reduce population, or I don't think his little plan actually works. But anyone can believe it. They want to. What do we got happening this week, Jeffrey?
Well, we'll get to Bill Gates in a second.
Okay.
So out of The Intercept, this is an online media outlet, news outlet, independent. There's a headline that came out, and I thought this was really interesting because for the first time, it's actually linking COVID-19, the infection, the spread of it, to industrial chemicals. The headline, scientists pin blame for some coronavirus deaths on air pollution, PFAS, and other chemicals. So there's 2 parts this story goes. And again, I thought this was interesting because we haven't had the finger blamed on industry yet. So it starts out and it cites an air pollution study that's done out of China. So what they did was they looked at 120 cities from July 23rd, and that's the first day of the lockdown, all the way to February 29th. and they looked at 6 different types of air pollutants out of China. Now, as some of the viewers may know, Wuhan, China, where this outbreak allegedly began, is notorious for its pollution. I mean, to the point where people were protesting in the streets by the thousands before we even heard of the coronavirus. So a lot of people early on said, hey, look, it may be an air pollution situation that's really amplifying these cases in the hospitals and the emergency rooms. So the study, it concluded out of China that, quote, our study suggests that there is a statistically significant relationship between air pollution and COVID-19 infection. Short-term exposure to higher concentrations of 5 of those 6 air pollutants was associated with increased risk for COVID-19 infection. Now, similar studies found the same thing out of northern Italy. And if I remember, that's where it jumped. That became the new Wuhan center early on in the outbreak. So, it leads to a lot of questions. Was it directly air pollution? Is it kind of air pollution? Or, what's going on with that? But it is an interesting data point. And you got to think that some of these respiratory units and some of these people were going in there with air pollution symptoms, with respiratory disease from air pollution that were labeled COVID early on in Italy and China, at least.
And then when we look to the hardest hit place, here in America, New York, known for its incredible pollution and congestion, millions of people living on top of each other, cars and bad air. So it does, and I think about, if you remember when Zach Bush came on the show, he was talking about how they know that, viruses and bacteria, I believe it was, can be carried on the pollutants in the air, that thicker air, and that's why he thought in the winter we should stop driving cars maybe, because it's just not clearing out. You don't have all the trees and things that absorb all of that stuff. So, super interesting, and I think it's clear the pollution is definitely playing a part, especially when we talk about upper respiratory issues as one of the things there. And I just thought to myself, is it causing COVID-19, or maybe it just is COVID-19? Is it just, different environmental factors that are making people really sick that's just getting hit with this label? I look forward to seeing where that science goes. Hopefully, those scientists continue to be funded to continue that research.
Yeah, it's really interesting. The WHO, according to their numbers, it was 4.2 million people die per year from ambient air pollution. 26% of those were respiratory disease. So, it's kind of interesting that the WHO didn't mention any of that during these last 3-4 months when it comes to this outbreak. But nevertheless, going back to the article, now they mentioned the inhalants, the air pollution, the ambient air pollution, but they also talk about industry chemicals like BPA, PFAS, PFAS. That was the chemical that was at the center of the movie Dark Waters, if anybody's seen that recently.
So Teflon and plastics and things like that.
Yeah, the CDC director for the National Center of Environmental Health at the agency calls it one of the most seminal public health challenges for the next decades. Unfortunately, I want to trust them, but they didn't get it right with autism. So, but we'll take their word for it that they're doing something really, really good and positive here.
But these are not, right? They're not. I mean, we've already talked about the fact that you've got Monsanto paying out $10 billion to cover the cases, yet they're going to keep spraying that crap on our food, and the FDA is not stopping them. We know that there's glyphosate in our food, but also in our vaccines. They won't test the vaccines. They won't test the food. So, I'm sorry if I no longer get any little buzzy feeling when I hear the CDC or the FDA are planning on investigating something and trying to stop the greatest tragedy of our lifetime. Unfortunately, most of these people already were working for, Monsanto, Bayer, 3M, you name it. It's part of the incredible cycle we keep reporting on the show every single week.
Yes, I do agree with you on that. I was researching this study, and then I saw, researching this chemical, and it's linked to COVID-19, and I saw that on the CDC website, and I said, oh boy, I want to believe that, but that actually makes me pause for a second.
Right.
But these forever chemicals, they have been studied, and they do show lower antibody responses for diseases and actually for vaccination too. So that's the big concern when it comes to this and COVID-19, that intersection there. And
what does this term you're using mean? Forever chemical. What does that mean?
They don't go away. They accumulate in the body, they accumulate in the ecosystem, in fish, in wildlife, in the waterways. So it's not something that naturally degrades, essentially. And that's why it becomes a problem, because they're not really regulated as they should be. Shock. But
Right.
as it builds up in our body, the ill health effects compound, and some of those fall right in line with lowered immunity, lower antibody responses, obesity, all these risk factors that are COVID-19 risk factors, again, according to the CDC. So there does seem to be some type of link with this. But like you said, why aren't they looking at glyphosate?
Right.
A little too early for that one yet?
Right. Well, you mentioned, I think for people out there, if you haven't seen Dark Waters with Mark Ruffalo, it is an incredible film. We've got to support films like that are, trying to bring, the story of whistleblowers like that to the forefront. Please support films like that. It's the only way they get made, right? We've got to show that, while you're sitting there on your Barca lounger watching Netflix or something, you actually once in a while watch a movie that has some information in it. So please support Dark Waters, and it'll help you understand what some of these products that are maybe making you vulnerable to COVID-19. All right, what else do we have?
Yeah, so, going back to Bill Gates now, as I was watching that clip at the beginning of the show, I'm realizing I'm wearing the same color shirt as him. I don't know. I'm not really that honored. I feel like I should rip this thing off right now or I burn it.
Hold on.
So
we need the women to be focused, Jeffrey. We can't have that happening right now. Keep your shirt on.
Okay, so in 2015, let's talk about Bill Gates. So the world's first malaria vaccine, after 30 years of research, this is backed by Bill Gates, gets a green light. And it's funded by something called the Path Malaria Vaccine Initiative, along with GlaxoSmithKline, this collaborative. So PATH is funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which poured more than $200 million into the project. GSK said it has spent more than $365 million on the effort. So, almost half a Bill and Melinda Gates vaccine. So that was 2015. Now we fast forward to 2019, and this is out of Science Mag, and we start seeing this progression timeline here in the media. The first malaria vaccine rolled out in Africa, despite limited efficacy and, wait for it, nagging safety concerns. Oh, it's just those nagging, just kind of like a little splinter on my finger.
Feisty little safety concerns.
Yeah, just no big deal. So, so the rollout, it basically was in 2 African countries. And they say in the article, it isn't quite the breakthrough the field has been waiting for. Most Curex, that's actually the name of this vaccine, efficiency and durability are mediocre. 4 doses offer only 30% protection against severe malaria for no more than 4 years. Some experts question whether that is worth the cost and effort. The biggest concern, however, is about vaccine safety.
So why are they concerned about vaccine safety?
Well, that brings us to the BMJ. Now we're tracking this on this timeline of articles and investigation. So the pilot program in Africa is over 700,000 children. So you think if they have limited efficacy and some safety concerns, why are you going to roll out to 700,000 children? But anyway, that's what's happening.
And it looks like we have some safety concerns. Let's check into that by giving 1 million children the vaccine, and then we'll get some answers.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
You know what? Shockingly, we might actually reduce the population in the process, right? Just it could be a just a convenient little side effect.
If you're trying to make people healthy so they, I guess, don't have more kids, that's his logic. Why are you rolling out this vaccine this quickly to that many people? But anyway, so the BMJ, right? This is Peter Doshi out of the BMJ. An amazing report. It says WHO's malaria vaccine study represents a serious breach of international ethical standards. So the experts were troubled by a lack of informed consent in the study. Now, you ask about safety. So from the BMJ, this is what they write. Its use, the vaccine, is being limited to pilot implementation, in part to evaluate outstanding safety concerns that emerged from previous clinical trials. These were a rate of meningitis in those receiving Mosquirix of 10 times that of those who did not, increased cerebral malaria cases, and a doubling in the risk of death for any cause in girls. Here we go again with the girl mortality increase.
Why is it always the girls? The DTP last week, it was the Penta vaccine. It's in the girls now, and when you think about if you wanted to reduce population, That's where you go. I mean, and this is funded. This is Bill and Melinda Gates are directly involved with this trial right now, correct?
Yes. So exactly. And if I'm someone that wants to put out a vaccine that is questionable, you have questionable safety. How else are you going to do it? Well, if there's questionable safety, people aren't probably going to take it. So
Right.
we need to screw around with their informed consent so they don't know there's questionable safety. And that's exactly what the BMJ found. This is what they write. WHO contends that the study is a, quote, pilot introduction and not a research activity. It says that those children living in areas randomized to receive the new vaccine will do so as part of each country's routine vaccination schedule, and that consent is implied. Well, as they say, implied consent is not informed consent. So what the BMJ found was it wasn't even clear if these parents were receiving info about the safety issues or if they even understood it. So they asked the
Right.
WHO, "Hey, can you send us your materials over?" They sent over some pamphlets that were being distributed by the countries, and it didn't say anything about the female mortality in there, the possible increased risk of female mortality. So, you ask the
Or
WHO, "Hey."
meningitis, or like brain, was it malaria, neurological malaria? Like, I mean, shocking
It did
problem
mention
when you're
those
trying to
two.
avoid malaria, right? It did. It did.
Yeah, it
Okay,
did mention
good.
those two. It didn't say
All
anything
good.
about the deaths. However, they asked the BMJ asked WHO, "How are you communicating this?" They basically it sounded like threw a handful of pamphlets at them and said, "I don't know, this is what we give to the countries. Just check it out." And there wasn't this, you hear the word robust. There wasn't this robust reporting system. Are the families understanding what meningitis is? Do they know what it looks like? Are people reporting it? None of this stuff is transparent, if it's even happening.
I mean, this is what I think is really we need to do more investigation into is, Bill and Melinda Gates call this a nonprofit. They're an NGO. Oh, we're going out to save children. But essentially what it seems to me that they're doing is they're using a nonprofit to test vaccines on innocent populations. They don't give them informed consent. I think they even said in that last paragraph something to the effect that this isn't research. We're not doing a safety study.
Mm-hmm.
This is a pilot implementation program. Even though it hasn't been tested for safety, and there are some definite warning signals coming out, we weren't there to test for safety. We were just planning on skipping that entire process altogether. But you can imagine they go in as, oh, it's a nonprofit. We want to save the world. We're going to do, pilot implementation projects on Africa and India. And then if the vaccine proves to be effective, then GSK and our investments in GSK will go on to make billions of dollars as we use the vaccine in other places that maybe know better or actually know what's going on. I think the whole thing is a total scam. But again, when I think, and that's why, when I thought about how often Bill Gates talks about reducing population, clearly it's not making people healthier because they have a serious health risk. They're causing clearly meningitis at 10 times the rate and neurological malaria and death. And yet their answer to that is, we just got to make the pilot group larger. Let's get 1 million children in there, and then let's see what happens. I mean, it's really shocking because it just shows you how these people just see numbers, right? These aren't human beings. They're not children. They're just numbers.
Perfect point. Perfect point. So look at this as a one-child situation. So you go into the doctor's office and your child goes back and gets the appointment with the doctor. Taking a little while, so you walk in and you see the doctor putting a vaccine in your kid's arm. You say, "What's going on?" "Well, this is a pilot implementation. Well, did they agree to this?" "I didn't agree to this." "Well, it's implied consent. They showed up they're in my office, so this is implied that they want this vaccine." "Okay, well, what's this vaccine all about?" "Well, I developed it and I made it a little bit and I have some money interest in giving this vaccine out, but don't worry about all that stuff. There's just some safety issues and we want to figure this out."
Yeah, it's amazing. Amazing story. And again, I think one of those things here at the Informed Consent Action Network, we're going to get deeper into this. We continue to press for lawsuits around the world. I don't care if you're a nonprofit and say you're there to save the world. If you're killing children, we're coming after you. Jeffrey Jackson, once again, shocking things to report. being poisons that may lead to us being sicker from COVID-19. And then, of course, in nations that, really seem to always be the brunt of this, where you find death, you find children and pilot programs, there you will find Bill and Melinda Gates. Thank you for bringing that great report to us.
You're very welcome.
All right, we'll see you next time. All right, for everyone that can read, make sure you check out the Jackson Report at thehighwire.com. Every week, Jeffrey Jackson gets really in-depth and puts out some brilliant articles, and that is found at thehighwire.com. Throughout, the entire existence of the Highwire, but really over this entire COVID pandemic, we've been interviewing scientists on all sides of this discussion. In fact, I just had to answer a load of questions from a fact-checker organization called NewsGuard. I have no idea who they are or what exactly their issue is, but it was clear there was a bias towards the Highwire asking me how I call what we do news. How do I interview the guests that I do? Why do I promote ideas that are not true? So let me just make a caveat right here and what I tried to explain to NewsGuard, which is that the Highwire is a part of a live, ongoing investigation to find the truth. I worked at CBS on the medical talk show The Doctors. I know how television is usually done. We are not doing it that way. We do not pre-interview our guests, figure out exactly what it is we want them to say, and then cover only that issue so that we sort of soft serve you some slight piece of information or partial truth. Instead, the executive producers here, some of whom have come over from CBS with me, we wanted to do something different. We wanted to not know what we were getting into, to follow our own questions into the journey of science and medicine. But I think when it comes to this pandemic, nobody can claim a moral high ground right now on understanding what is COVID-19. Have these draconian measures been good or bad? Is it man-made? Is it natural? All of these things, for me, just to be honest, are still hanging in a balance. And we may not know the answers to these questions for another year, or perhaps a decade, or maybe lifetimes. Maybe someday in history, someone will look back and really make sense of what took place here. But this is why we are here, to be a part of this investigation, and you're a part of it with us. You're tuning in, and your comments and your ideas and your thoughts are affecting how we move and how we think. This is an interactive process, which is why I'm really excited about our next guest. I would have to say, even though we have been getting world-renowned scientists now from all over the world, there is not one doctor or scientist that has had more requests from you for us to bring him onto this show. And especially those of you that are recurring donors and making all this possible, I want you to know we're listening to you. And so it is my honor and my pleasure to bring the most requested doctor in Highwire history. I'm talking about Dr. Andrew Kaufman is joining me now. All right, Dr. Kaufman, I mean everything I said. We are literally getting lambasted on YouTube. When are you going to finally talk to Dr. Andrew Kaufman? Are you afraid of Dr. Kaufman? Because we are just, as I said, firing and shooting from the hip here, what is your background that makes your voice important enough that so many people are requesting you? So just give me a little history of where you come from and what your education and specialty is.
Sure. Well, I studied biology at MIT as an undergraduate, where I first learned about research. I worked at a couple of different biotech companies. I was a physician assistant, and I worked in cancer medicine, mostly in hematology. And then I went to medical school and did my psychiatry residency at Duke, and then subspecialized in forensic psychiatry in Upstate Medical University in Syracuse, New York. And I joined the faculty there and was on the faculty for several years. And I conducted research that was published in peer-reviewed journals. I held leadership positions at the university and in my professional organizations. And I even had a biotech company where I invented a medical device and tried to make that a commercial success. I've also testified in a lot of legal matters as an expert witness in various different courts. So I've done quite a lot of things in healthcare and medicine, and had a wide variety of experience. I think what is unique about my perspective or my position here is that I don't have any ties or obligations to either the medical or the scientific establishment. And but I do have the skills to understand scientific research and read papers. So I can report on this and express my opinion about what I believe to be true without having any repercussions or pressure.
Excellent. All right. So, you know, for those that have been watching the High Wire all the way through this pandemic, we have laid out real concerns, beginning with the modeling around this pandemic and the supposed deaths that were supposed to take place. Very early on, it became clear to us that this virus did not have the death rate we were being told. I would say that in many ways, we were one of the first media organizations to predict the fall of the imperial model, which of course it came crashing down. We have been calling out, you know, Anthony Fauci and Deborah Birx, who have continuously kept changing their story, readjusting numbers based on models. We know that we have bloated death numbers because of, you know, the way that we are reporting deaths in hospitals. All of these things we've covered. I've talked to scientists that have been on here, like Dr. James Lyons-Weiler, who at first said that this was a man-made virus, potentially a bioweapon that could have escaped, then decided, he came back and said maybe it's natural. Zach Bush, who said he thinks that maybe this is more likely to be natural. But so we've covered the gamut here. But I would say that we have been questioning the mainstream narrative from the beginning because it just doesn't add up. But you are actually taking this, I think, a step further than the High Wire has ever really gone before on this topic, because up until now, we are using the idea that this is a virus that has swept the nation. Maybe it was here earlier than we thought. The numbers aren't what we seem, but there does seem to be some dangers when it gets into nursing homes, all of those things. You are actually questioning whether or not COVID-19 exists at all. Am I correct about that, or please clarify your position?
Yeah, thank you. That's pretty close. So I just want to separate the SARS-CoV-2 virus, which is what they've named, what they call as a virus, and COVID-19 being the illness. Okay. So I actually reject both hypotheses, but I don't want to come across as saying that I deny that there were people dying during this mortality spike from late March until May. I just have different explanation for what resulted in those deaths. But what I've done from the beginning, once I noticed that there was some fishy things going on in the policies of how they were handling this pandemic, because it was divergent from any past policies that I'd ever been familiar with, I went and looked at the papers that had claimed to isolate this virus, and there are essentially 4 papers. And when I read these, I read them very closely, and I had to, do some investigation, because they use kind of a lot of language that's difficult to understand unless you're publishing in this field. So it took me a bit to parse out exactly what they did, but what I found out is that they never isolated or purified a virus. So what I mean is, in order to identify a virus, it's basically a particle, right, that has a membrane, and inside of it some genetic material and a few proteins throughout. And so in order to identify that, what you would do is that you would basically purify it from a sick person, from the diseased part of their body. In this case, they took samples from lung fluid, because the people that they identified as having this illness had respiratory symptoms. But they never actually purified any viral particles out of that lung fluid or out of their tissue culture experiments later on. Instead, what they did is they amplified a piece of genetic material that had a part of its sequence that they were specifically looking for, because they had pre-identified these sequences as being from viruses. And they just basically identified a snippet of this genetic material and said that this was a virus. And they did really nothing more. So there was never a particle that was purified from which they would extract genetic material and say, this RNA came from this particle. Therefore, it belongs to the particle and it makes up a basically genome of a virus. If they wanted to go a step further and prove that such a virus would cause an illness, what they would have to do is then put that virus particle in a healthy host and then show that that host develops the same disease. And those are called Koch's postulates. And that's basically the common sense rules which the germ theory scientists originally formulated themselves to prove if a germ or pathogen causes an illness. And this was never done either. And this has far-reaching implications because the test, the main test that's been used, the RT-PCR test that I'm sure you've talked about at length, is based on this little piece of RNA that we don't know where it comes from, because it came from this lung fluid, which has many, many things in it, many sources of RNA, DNA, many different kinds of cells, including human and microbial. And we also know that many what they call viral sequences have been found in our own cells and particles that our own cells make, known as exosomes, in the past. So it could very well be that this RNA is from our own cells, from exosomes, or it could be from another microbial source. We just have no idea of telling where it was because they never found the particle that it came from and took it from that particle. And there's a new article that came out written by Torsten Engelbrecht, where he actually emailed the authors of these 4 papers and asked them directly, did you show any evidence of a purified virus? And all 4 of them answered that they did not purify any viral particles. So they're essentially admitting that they don't know the origin of the genetic material.
So just to be clear, this is something they could do, right? It is possible to isolate this particle and figure out where it came from, what it is. Why would they skip what seems like a really important issue? And look, if it was just a common cold and they just wanted to get to some other hypotheses and we're doing some studies in a lab somewhere that I don't care about, fine. But you have shut down the world. You have destroyed the economy of the United States of America and many other economies, most of the economies around the world. You would hope that the best science was being done before you took that step. So how hard is that step? I mean, is it like cost $1 billion to isolate it, or is there a reason why they would skip what seems like an obvious step to make sure we knew what we were talking about?
Yeah, well, that's a great question, Del, and this is why it's so important, is because all of these measures that have been taken are based on this scientific assumption that has not been proven. So they would actually be able to do this as long as there were an actual viral particle that they could find. So the procedure to purify these particles has been developed long ago, and it's been used many times. So it was originally developed to isolate these viruses that live among bacteria cells called bacteriophages. And a lot of the science is based on the science of bacteriophages. But they've also been able to use the same technique to purify exosomes, which are particles very, very similar to what they say virus particles are, that are made by our own cells in response to some kind of illness or toxin or infection. And so the procedure is essentially that they take the body fluid that contains the particle, and then they would filter it for size to remove any bigger cells, because these particles are much, much smaller than any human or bacterial cell. And then they would use several different techniques using the centrifuge, which can separate things based on density. And they would essentially, through this process, would purify the viral particles into a tight band in a test tube, and then they can pull them out with a syringe or a pipette. They can look at them under the microscope and see a pure homogeneous particles. They could then also take out the genetic material and have a full sequence of it from end to end, from one piece rather than from thousands of pieces. And they can also characterize the chemicals on it, like we've been told that there's an angiotensin II receptor, right? So they could do an assay and show that it's on the membrane of this particle quite easily. So this science has been laid out. It's been done for many other types of experiments, like I said, with viruses and lower organisms as well as with exosomes. So there's no reason it couldn't be done. It might be slightly more expensive. It takes slightly longer to achieve, but they could, first find these genetic snippets that they theoretically think may be associated with a virus, but can't prove where they're from. And then they could publish that as a preliminary report and then follow up with the actual purification where they can prove, beyond a shadow of a doubt that this is a virus.
So
And if they did that,
to be clear,
yeah.
since we've been looking at this since, last December, we've certainly had enough time to have done this science by now, right? We should be able to clarify these things. And I'll be honest, I think people are used to me being somewhat skeptical of medical establishment, especially when I see steps being skipped. It makes me think they probably did it and did not come up with the type of result that they wanted, so they leave that step out. That's just me. I'm not going to put that on you, but let me just then be clear. Are you saying that there is no virus out there that is sweeping the nation right now? Or are you saying that this is simply like every other coronavirus every year, or maybe the identical coronavirus, they're just making something, new about something old? What is your, exact perspective on what is making people sick?
Yeah, well, I think that's a question that we need to answer separately, and there may be a different answer depending on the geographic location and exactly what has happened. But what I am saying for sure is that there is not one scientist who has isolated or purified a virus and made a concrete association with a new illness. So there's no science that proves that, or anywhere even close to proving that. So there have been spikes in mortality around the world in different places, but we need to look for other causes or explanations of that, since there's no solid evidence that there's a virus causing any of it.
Okay, then let me ask you this question, because just recently reported that in Spain, they're saying they found the SARS-CoV-2, I believe it was, in the sewage from all the way back March 2019. We're seeing, blood tests that are going back in different countries. They're showing maybe it came here before Wuhan. What is it they're testing for and seeing if it's not SARS-CoV-2? What is that then? There's something they're seeing. There's something they're testing for. So can you explain to me what that is?
Yeah, sure. What they're testing for is a short snippet of genetic material, of RNA in this case. So it's the same thing that the PCR test is based upon. So just to give you a sort of a picture of the scale of this, they say that the full genome, which they haven't mapped in the way that I described, but they pieced together using computer modeling, just like Neil Ferguson's computer modeling. But they say that it has, I think, 30 or 40,000 bases long, the whole genome. The little snippets that they're testing for are 200 to 300 bases long. So they're just a fragment of what they say this whole genomic sequence is. But once again, they don't have any proof of the origin of this sequence of RNA. So what they're just showing is this sequence of RNA is present in a variety of samples. And I think the president of Tanzania even tested it on a piece of fruit and showed that it was present. But if you just think about the human samples for a moment, like let's say that it's our own RNA that is expressed under certain environmental circumstances, like perhaps when we're ill, or if the humidity is really low, or things like that, well, we're basically just showing the presence of our own RNA from those circumstances. So there's no way to correlate it with a virus.
All right, so you're going to a place that I mean, this is really interesting, and I want to get back to a question just based on how we're proving the RNA and its relationship to SARS and others. But before we do, I want to go here because I can't get a straight answer on this. It seems like, I mean, as I travel around and meet lots of very interesting scientists, there seems to be a question about what has long been referred to as germ theory, right? This idea that viruses travel through the air, we get them from the outside, they come in, we get sick. I'm hearing more and more scientists speak to what I believe is being referred to as terrain, a new concept, terrain theory, that your body expresses perhaps the measles from the inside. It's already there. I've heard it described as perhaps it's like a channel that's turned on or something that's turned on can you give me, because I still am waiting for an explanation, and I know that exosomes might be a part of this. Can you try to convince me that our body creates these things from the inside? What is your theory on that? Because I'm still very, very confused about this idea.
Sure. Well, terrain theory is actually not that new, although it is gaining some traction right now. And a lot of people in the natural healing space actually devise their approaches based on terrain theory. And essentially what it says is, rather than a germ coming from the outside and causing an illness, that germs actually are part of the repair mechanism after there's damage to our tissue from an illness. So there be some insult that causes an illness, and commonly that could be related to malnutrition, like a breakdown of a tissue, not being able to function. It could be a toxic exposure. There are many sources of that. It could be a traumatic injury. And once the damage is halted, then your body basically calls on microbes from different areas to come and clean up the area just like they do in nature. And during the cleanup process, and they work in tandem with our immune system, they would secrete factors that would cause local symptoms like tissue swelling in order to increase the blood flow to that area, to bring nutrients for repair and to remove toxic waste. It would also cause secretions, right, like the runny nose that you have in a cold, which is basically your body's way of expelling the waste products from that tissue damage out of your body. So that's essentially the model of terrain theory. The science behind it was put forth by a number of different scientists, including Antoine Béchamp, who was a contemporary and rival of Louis Pasteur, as well as Enderlein and Gaston Naessens. And they have mapped out basically these tiny little particles that come from our own cells, and they've viewed these, and you can view videos of this under a microscope. It uses a special kind of microscope called a dark field microscope, which allows us to visualize cells while they're alive. In regular medicine, they always use dead and fixed tissue under the microscope, so you could never observe the behavior of the cells. But what you see under dark field microscopy is that, let's say you're looking at a sample of red blood cells, you see these little spots of light or flecks of light, and they bud out of the cells, and then they start changing their shape into different forms. And this kind of cyclic development has been mapped out by those scientists that I mentioned, and shown that basically they change shape into different mature forms of bacteria and fungi, all the microbes that normally live in our body. And that in response to a specific illness, they might change shape into certain species that are better at responding to that part of the body or at cleaning up that type of damage. And so it's really fascinating to see how this has all come together through these scientific experiments, and that overall property or process is known as pleomorphism, where the organisms can change their shape, which pleomorphism means many shapes.
Do you think this pandemic is bringing more attention to this concept? And if I'm to understand from a lay perspective, then there's, whether you're hypothesizing this, I know several people are, that perhaps this RNA code that was found has been produced by our own bodies, or those that were tested in China and other places, as a repair mechanism to some other, whether it was pollution in Wuhan or too many antibiotics, whatever their body was trying to overcome, that it was produced from the inside of the body, and therefore is capable for bodies all around the world to produce this very RNA. And what I found so fascinating when I was just lightly looking at this is we do hear so much conversation about asymptomatic carriers, and it really just, there seems to be that, like, I want like the exclamation point, question mark, above the head of every scientist, as they really seem confused on trying to explain what's happening. Why are we testing people that are, already had it and had no idea they had it? Or, as we have discussed, why, with Dr. Friston's work, who we featured, he's finding, as he mapped the world as though he's mapped a brain, one of the top brain scientists, that there appears to be 50 to 80% of the population, based on the way his models work, that can't get this illness or don't seem to be being infected by it. it does lead to somebody's not understanding something, and then we get to testing, right? So if we're testing for this, and it's natural inside of some people, or maybe all of us, or maybe just during certain times, it would lead to, we saw a declaration by a congressman last week on our show saying even when we do these antibody tests, scientists don't really even know what a positive test means.
Even tests meeting FDA's standards can be false more than half of the time, especially if the prevalence of COVID-19 in the surrounding population is low. And even with a true positive, scientists are not sure even what that means.
So are you suggesting that there's a potential that this is just RNA that our bodies create naturally, and we are locking everybody down, putting masks on them for something that just simply may exist inside of them by nature?
Yes, yeah, that's essentially exactly what I'm suggesting. And when our bodies are exposed to some kind of insult, right? Even if you just get a little laceration, there's a response. Our bodies make certain antibodies, proteins, our cells mobilize to respond to make sure that nothing dangerous has invaded the integrity of our bodies. And I think that we could simply be measuring some response like that. That's very non-specific. And there's really no way to tell what this test is measuring, because if you look at the RNA test, we don't know the source of the RNA, and there's no gold standard to compare it to, so there's no known error rate, and you can't calculate one. The antibody test is even less specific, and even the FDA in their guidance about the antibody tests said that they should not be used for diagnosis. And with the PCR test, the CDC, as well as the manufacturers in their package insert, say that the test should not be used for diagnosis. So what I think is essentially happening is that the more tests we conduct, the more positives we're going to have, and then the media is reporting an increase in the number of cases, just based on these testing results without any need even for clinical information, like whether someone is sick or not.
Let me ask you this question. We're calling it SARS-CoV-2, which means that it apparently is extremely similar to the SARS coronavirus that was extremely deadly, did not do nearly the damage that was expected. What is the science behind connecting it to SARS? Is it identical to SARS? I mean, I hear that the only difference is maybe just a slight spike protein. Have they determined that this really is just another SARS coronavirus?
Well, I want to first say that the original SARS virus wasn't isolated either, and they used the same exact procedures in that. So you have to really question the basis of comparison to something that wasn't clearly proven in origin in the first place.
Right.
But what they say is, based on a fragment, once again, a fragment or a few fragments of RNA, that there was an 84% sequence identity. Therefore, it's the same or a closely related virus. But I'll tell you, if you look at the sequence identity between humans and chimpanzees, a totally different species, we have 96% sequence identity, much higher than the identity between these two alleged viruses.
Wow.
So I don't really understand how they could even relate them based on such a low percentage of sequence identity.
Interesting. I want to play a video for you. I don't know, I would imagine that you're aware that in New York, in the middle of this crisis where I think nearly a third of the deaths in America occurred, New York, New Jersey, there was an ER doctor that came forward. I've been referring to him as Paul Revere because I believe he came out and really had the guts to announce and warn the world that, all of this has been happening in closed hospitals, right? We're not allowed in. We're not allowed to see what's happening there. We're not allowed to see the hospital beds. So it's only been reports from doctors that are coming out to report to us. But he said something very interesting. This is just a couple of months ago. Of course, I'm talking about Dr. Cameron Kyle Seidel. Let me just play this clip really quick.
9 days ago, I opened an intensive care unit to care for the sickest COVID-positive patients in this city. In these 9 days, I have seen things I have never seen before. In treating these patients, I have witnessed medical phenomenon that just don't make sense in the context of treating a disease that is supposed to be a viral pneumonia. COVID-19 lung disease, as far as I can see, is not a pneumonia and should not be treated as one. It appears as some kind of viral-induced disease, most resembling high-altitude sickness. I have seen patients dependent on oxygen take off their oxygen and quickly progress through a state of anxiety and emotional distress and eventually get blue in the face. And while they look like patients absolutely on the brink of death, they do not look like patients dying of pneumonia. The patients I'm seeing in front of me look most like as if a person was dropped off on the top of Mount Everest without time to acclimate. I don't know the final answer of this disease, but I'm quite sure that a ventilator is not it.
All right, so I think this video that Kyle Seidel put out led to a sort of shift, at least in the protocols in hospitals. The NIH ended up saying we need to back away from ventilators, maybe move into giving people oxygen, which seems like that should have been a no-brainer from the beginning. We know that those ventilators killed 9 out of 10 people, and that's something that I've spoken out about. We've had scientists, I believe that hydroxychloroquine should be under much more consideration because of the successful trials that have been all over the world. But what it points to, and what I want to sort of challenge you with, is Kyle Seidel is talking about a very specific set of symptoms that he's never seen before, yet is seeing it, you know, in congruency amongst multiple patients. And he's reaching out to the doctors around the world saying, I know you're seeing this same anomaly too. And once I don't think we've seen the full adjustment, but it does appear as doctors adjust to seeing this more as a blood illness than maybe a respiratory illness. So we've talked about the heme and how SARS-CoV-2 appears to be attaching to red blood cells. All of this to me sounds like a very specific illness that true only is really having this, you know, mortal or acute effect on about, I think, 0.26% of the population. But how do you explain that from your perspective when there's such congruity with whatever this is and how people that are having acute reaction are reacting to it?
Right. Well, there's many things to consider. I think the most important thing to realize is that, at least in the United States, doctors have been prevented from sending these patients for autopsy. If we were able to autopsy these patients, then we would know really what was the cause of death. There is some data from Italy where they did a series of autopsies and they found a lot of blood clots in the lungs. And so in other words, a pulmonary embolism. And this is generally not caused by viruses. It has many causes, but sedating people and putting them on a ventilator could certainly cause blood clots in the lung. And that could cause problems with oxygenation that could lead to the symptoms that were described. There's also, you know, many other possibilities. Like one thing that just came right into my mind when I first heard that video that you just played was that it sounds like cyanide poisoning. But of course, you know, I don't know if anyone's looked into that or if they did any tests that would confirm that. I'm not sure of the data. There was no, see, when something like this happens that is an anomaly during a health crisis, what it should lead to is a major investigation where anyone that dies in that suspicious way or has those suspicious symptoms, if they do die, they should be autopsied. There should be investigators from public health agencies that should be coming in to try and figure out what's going on there. But there was no such effort that I'm aware of at all, and it seems like Dr. Seidel was pretty much silenced. Like I heard that he was taken off the ICU duty, and certainly we haven't heard any more from him that I'm aware of anyway since that time. So I think this is still really somewhat mysterious as to what causes it, but as he described, it is not the typical viral pneumonia, which is what they described in the original patients in Wuhan and in many other clinical reports.
Whatever it is, do you think we're having a shared experience across the world, though? Do you believe whether this is RNA that comes in from inside of us, is this RNA that is having an ill effect on a certain population, but it's similar around the world? Or do you think we are just sort of grabbing different, I mean, we know that there's a lot of comorbidities directly involved, whether it's heart disease, COPD, diabetes. They keep sort of shifting this list, and I think I heard the CDC may have, you know, whatever. It keeps changing. Do you believe that whatever it is, that there's a similarity to it around the world, or do you think we're just sort of lumping in a bunch of different ailments and making it into a disease?
Yeah, well, I think that there is some similarity because I think most of the deaths are actually a direct result or an indirect result of these lockdown type of policies that we've seen around the world, right? Because, this happened, very suddenly in a heartbeat right after the World Health Organization announced the pandemic status. And suddenly you have people, that are out of work, right? They're told to stay home and lock themselves in. They're put in this state of intense fear, which has a lot of deleterious effects on our physical and mental aspects of our life. And then they also are basically prohibited from accessing healthcare. So, like, here's one thing that's really underreported, and there's no certain statistics, but there is one study that looks at this indirectly that shows that between 1 and 2% of all presentations to the emergency department in the United States are due to low blood sugar from diabetes medications. So if you're suddenly put in a fear state, locked in your house, your activities change, and you can't access your doctor, like, you're going to have different eating habits, different activities, so your insulin or other requirements for those medications are going to change. And people were afraid to go to the ER in an emergency, even with heart attacks and things like that, because they thought they would get this virus and die. So I think a lot of it is just from not having access to that type of care, and people simply got very sick and died in their homes. We've seen many, many other factors, like we've seen a big increase in suicides because of all of the devastation that people have had in their lives. There's increased addiction because, liquor stores were always maintained as an essential business. And being a psychiatrist, I was curious and found out that actually street drugs were still available and plentiful. So people still had access to this, but a lot of extra time. And then they started getting government checks. So they had sort of free money. Then there was, of course, the mismanagement in the hospitals and the nursing homes. And I don't think we can underestimate this. I have this kind of vision of what went on in the nursing homes, that they sent people who were ill there. They said they were COVID positive. Everyone was totally scared to go near them. So they essentially neglected them. They, had a DNR status on people, even if it was against the family wishes.
Resuscitate, right? Yep.
Exactly. And I even heard testimony from some nursing care nurses that worked in these facilities that they couldn't even get access to regular pharmaceuticals, that they were just sending things like morphine and hospice end-of-life type drugs. So they didn't even have, the normal aspects to treat these people. So, all of these factors and several more coming together, and then with, variations in different culture and geographic situations. A lot of people have talked about the degree of air pollution in Wuhan and in northern Italy. So those may be factors too, but are those, different year to year, or is it the same and, not something unique to this year? And I agree with you completely that, this information is not being put out transparently, that we can't, have definitive answers to all these questions.
That's the problem, really. And I think that whether or not, I said at the top before we got in this interview that I think time is the only thing that will really bring us to the final answers, especially when science is not being properly done. If there's one thing I know that I definitely agree with you on, is that it just seems like the science is not being properly done. As you described, that we would have a way of isolating the particle, yet they're not doing it. It reminds me of a lot of the work that I've done, which is, why aren't we doing placebo studies on vaccines that we give our children if they're really safe? If vaccines make us healthier, why aren't you doing the most obvious study known to man, which is to compare vaccinated children to unvaccinated children? And people really attack me, including NewsGuard or fact checkers, and I say, look, I'm just a journalist that's saying I know how science is usually being done, and I'm incredibly skeptical and dismayed when obvious science is not being done. So let me ask you the final question that I get asked all the time as I discuss the issues that I've done a lot of investigation into, which is this: who is behind this? There must be, because it's not just one country, it's not just America. I see the World Health Organization, but why is no one in the world studying this particle? Why is no one really proving whether it's an exosome or a virus that's traveling in the air? Why is no one, and yet we are all using terrible models, continuing to move forward to destroy our economies, wearing more and more masks, it looks like into eternity, taking away more and more of our rights, in your opinion, and I've been talking with my team. At one point, I thought, well, this is just doctors and medicine, and this is, they're just taking control of the world. But hospitals are shutting down. Doctors are losing their jobs. There's something, it seems, much more sinister or bigger out there. Do you have a theory on what is behind the lack of science, the moving forward with terrible data, the lack of results, the misunderstandings, and really a forceful attack on medical freedom with what seems like no evidence whatsoever? There must be something behind it. What is your theory there?
Yeah, well, I think, there's a lot of evidence to look at here. And one thing that's really telling is that basically what happened is that we had almost all the nations of the world initiate virtually the same exact identical policies to deal with this situation at the same time. And this is really unprecedented, and it shows that there's not individual national sovereignty, because otherwise there would be a lot more variation in how different nations decided to handle this situation. Now, you can look at many documents in many organizations, like the Rockefeller Foundation, like the World Economic Forum, right? We know, I'm sure you've reported about Event 201. There are many documents and exercises like that all seem to have planning elements related to our current situation. I think the World Economic Forum is the most detailed and impressive. And if you haven't looked at their website, you should definitely look at a couple of things. Look at their plan for the Big Reset, which is clearly been in the making for decades. And then look at their strategic initiative, I believe, the chart that goes 200 layers deep. And you'll see that there's been intense planning to every aspect of how these things fit together. And you're right, even if there was a real virus that really was scary, why would it require shutting down all of the businesses that were shut down? Why would it require shutting down hospitals? Why would it require laying off healthcare workers, the opposite of what you would expect in such a crisis, right? So nothing really adds up here. So there is another motive. And I believe that the motivation is really to rework or re-engineer our society into a global system with extremely limited freedoms. And that's why they've been taking away our freedoms and telling us the only way to restore any freedom is to allow the governments to monitor our every move and every aspect of our health and our body's integrity, and possibly, and even our behavior, where we go, who we congregate with, right? And that's not going to obviously create more freedom. It's going to be a device for more control. And I want to add one really important thought, and I think this speaks to one of your the biggest issue for you, which is that if there is no virus that's been proven, then what is the vaccine going to really be for?
That is a question that will probably keep me up tonight. Dr. Andrew Kaufman, I want to thank you for taking the time. I can see why so many people were asking to be on here. And I hope that as this thing moves forward, maybe we can have you back as we will get more details. I believe that the light is shining down. I think more and more scientists, at one point, someone's saying the things that you're saying. I know you're coming into some conflicts, but there are a lot of world-renowned scientists really, I think, starting to ask the right questions. So it seems to me if we all continue to demand that the science be done, we're going to get to some answers. But thank you for taking the time, and thank you for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure, Del. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Absolutely. Well, there you have it, Dr. Andrew Kaufman. You asked for it, you got it, here on the High Wire. As he was talking about government monitoring, and that we're all losing our rights, and this idea of monitoring everybody, is it government? What if it's private agency? What about the private agencies? Why is Google and iPhones and, you know, Androids tracking us. And at moments where, remember, it was just, I think just a couple months ago, I felt like that Apple wouldn't even allow the FBI or somebody to get into the phone to track a serial killer. But oh my God, if it's coronavirus, we'll wipe away everyone's rights and let you track anyone in our phone systems. But tracking, even when they don't know what this is, which I think is clear, even when the antibodies don't work, but more and more, we're looking at monitoring. And when it comes to monitoring, sometimes there's government agencies and sometimes there's private agencies, maybe funded by government bodies or maybe funded by the pharmaceutical industry. And one of these monitoring agencies or a group that has come together is very, very oddly specific. They are tracking all of the social media regarding discussions about vaccine hesitancy. Who are they doing it for? What are they doing it for? Who's funding them? Well, if you want to know what I'm talking about, then maybe I will have to reference you to this ad by Vector that you may have seen. I'm not sure if you followed what that video said. It almost put me into a trance. I'm not sure they're accomplishing what they want by putting everyone to sleep, but clearly we now have a group. Project Vector is tracking those of us that are questioning the safety of vaccines, which I guess they're describing as misinformation. We did a little bit of research actually into this group. There's more and more, you know, murmurings about who is Project Vector, what's it up to. It looks like they're trying to supply information to investigative reporters and different medical people and systems to figure out how to shift the clearly growing movement. You, the people, smart, intelligent people that are now asking the right questions about safety. How are things tested? You know, why can't they prove with a vax versus unvax study that vaccines make you healthier? Behind, though, Project Vector is a guy named Joe Smizer. And there's a few videos out there, one where he gives a huge presentation about Project Vector. Obviously, I think, you know, out there trying to raise money for his group. And then he did a Q&A, so you'll see a couple of those videos. But first, I want to just let Joe describe what Project Vector is in his own words. Take a look at this.
Project Vector was set up specifically for vaccine misinformation. Project Vector, at the moment, PGP, Public Good Projects, is the only organization in the United States that monitors continuously, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, every day of the year, vaccine misinformation. And what we do every day is large-scale behavior change programs for public health. So we monitor all data from publicly available media sources. So any social media data we can get our hands on, but also television, like broadcast news, print, so newspapers and magazines, pretty much every website, just anything we can purchase and analyze using big data techniques. It's what do we do with them once we find them? That's the real question that we're faced with.
Why are we losing? Why are the vaccine safety people losing so badly?
I think we need a really, really dramatic change in our tactics. We don't know what we're doing. We need help. We need dramatic changes in strategies and tactics. It has not plateaued and things are getting worse. And I don't think we can solve this problem without acknowledging that things are getting worse every day. They're not getting better.
You do need help. In fact, what's really ironic. So, I mean, this thing goes on for like an hour or so, but the gist of it is essentially we can't just rely upon the millions of dollars funneled into brainwashing through mainstream media on CNN and MSNBC and Fox. That's not getting the job done. We've got to start reaching out to the people and let the people fight for the truth about vaccines and the information there. But Joe, I mean, honestly, one of your big issues is why is the message of vaccine hesitancy spreading so rigorously across the internet? I guess you didn't get the memo. You didn't get the memo from the World Health Organization meeting last December in Geneva, Switzerland, where Heidi Larson had something to say about the vaccine misinformation. You might find this interesting while you do your incredible deep dive in how to make a difference in this world. Joe, take a look at this.
I spend a lot of time talking, particularly in the last 6 months, with tech companies, Facebook, WhatsApp, Pulsar, Twitter, Instagram, WeChat, Weibo. They have a lot of fingers pointing at them to fix the misinformation problem. But it's not so simple. One, the biggest problem is a lot of it's not misinformation. Our problem is, as we've heard in the last 48 hours, that there's not anything 100%. And what actually can legally, without creating a censorship thing, can we absolutely say this is misinformation? Because we have a lot of ambiguity in the safety field, and we have to come to terms with that. So we have to think about it differently than deleting misinformation, but building trust so people are willing to put up with a certain amount of risk because they believe in it enough. They believe in our work, what we're doing, and that it's in their interest.
You see, Joe, from the beginning, you're going to have to recognize what battle you're fighting here. Much like I had, earlier on this show, Andrew Kaufman, who was discussing that we don't even know what this virus is or where it came from or the particle it was in, so we may not even be looking for the right thing. Clearly, you're fighting the wrong battle if you're already calling it misinformation, because the truth is, as Heidi Larson said, it's not misinformation. It is a fact that vaccines were not tested against placebos. That's just a fact. It is a fact that we just won a lawsuit, the Informed Consent Action Network, that's the nonprofit that supports the Highwire. We won a lawsuit against the CDC where they essentially were asked, prove to us vaccines don't cause autism, specifically in the first 6 vaccines given in the first 6 months of life, and they could not provide a single study that referenced those 6 vaccines. Well, there was one study that proved our point by the Institute of Medicine saying that there are no studies that show that DTaP does or does not cause autism. There just are no studies, hasn't been studied. So these are the problems you're going to have, Joe, and you're really off on the wrong foot if you're trying to attack an invisible enemy on the wrong battlefield. The battlefield is truth. As Heidi Larson said, your job is going to actually, how do you sell the fact that some people do die from vaccines, some people do get injured. We have very little data to know how many that is, but let's put a big bow on it. You got to work on the bow tying part of this, Joe. But anyway, while you were looking into this, and obviously I hope you're watching this since we did make your top 10, I'm assuming that, and you know that we reached out to Joe, everyone should know this, we reached out to Joe Miser, asked him if he wanted to come on the show. Surprisingly, we haven't gotten a response yet, but let's just show you some of the lists. Maybe you're on it, maybe you're not. Take a look at this.
There are fewer than 200 leaders, verified leaders of the anti-vax movement in the United States, and yet they have an incredibly disproportionate influence.
If you shut down the accounts of those 200 individuals, that's not stopping vaccine opposition. It is an enormous movement, and it can feel impossible to wrap your head around it or do anything about it or address it. It's a lot of it is outside of the domain of the comfort level of people in public health. But if you've decided as a society that that the only people who get to talk about vaccines being safe and effective is public health, well, then that sets you up for an enormous problem. Here are the top authors on Twitter that create over 60% of all misinformation about vaccines.
Well, there you have it. If we just bring up that list, we're striving for number one, but here, this is our Twitter account, twitter.com, right there at the bottom, number 10, Highwire Talk, coming in, right behind Rob Schneider. Look out, Rob, we're coming after you. But of course, this doesn't account for the millions of you that are currently watching the show around the world on Facebook here or YouTube or our own website, thehighwire.com. But we're proud. We're proud to have made the top 10. I'm still waiting for the, I guess, is it a trophy coming in the mail, a medal, something like that? I'm assuming it should be here any day. It's fascinating, isn't it? Listen to what they're saying, though, and listen to what they're up against. Even if you got rid of the top 200, influences or sites of which, I guess, we're in the top 10, he says it won't make a difference. It won't stop it because this is an enormous movement. Can you say it? Hashtag winning. Woo! We're on top of the world here, and clearly, as we keep showing you over the last several years, more and more reporting, whether it's the WHO having an entire weekend to discuss this, or Joe Smizer, creating Project Vector to try and track all of this. No one knows what to do, and believe me, there is a lot of funding trying to figure this all out. And honestly, I don't understand what the deal is, right? I mean, it's not hard to track. All you have to do is come to the Highwire, and I say everything we think here on the Highwire, everything we think about science and all the peer-reviewed science that backs up our point. Meanwhile, you can track us, or you can just tune in the Highwire and watch what we're doing. But let's look at the money, right? I mean, whenever we look at these things, we try to understand what's happening in this COVID-19 pandemic. Who's behind all of this? You obviously got to see who can fund it, what's going on here. We did just a slight dive into Project Vector. So let me just take you on a little ride here of what's really, or who, or, it is behind this. Take a look at this. If you go to the site Project Vector, what comes up, the project is a collaboration of the public good projects. You hear him reference PGP and the New York State Health Foundation. We were curious about that. What is the New York State Health Foundation? Well, when you go to the New York State Health Foundation, it says in our history, our roots are in insurance. New York State Health was established as a private foundation to receive the charitable funds resulting from the conversion of Empire Blue Cross Blue Shield from a nonprofit organization to a for-profit corporation since beginning operations in 2006. Well, if you look at the money brought in by this foundation, it's quite gigantic. New York State Health Foundation, here are the financial statements from 2018 and 2017. And what you will see is 2017, $304 million they brought in from their donor base. 2018, a slight drop. I guess they've dropped the ball a little bit. They only brought, including assets, of course, right? And then in 2018, it's dropped down to $272,984,000. That's a lot of money, folks. It's a lot of money to do these jobs of tracking people and figure out where you are and figuring out how to stop you. It's a really weird time in health, isn't it, where you're being tracked, and how do we silence people from having open conversations about their health? Well, to try and get an understanding of how they perceive us and how they perceive themselves and the finances that are behind all sides of this, take a look at what Joe had to say.
The funding is difficult to determine. Almost all these groups fundraise, so there are open calls for funding. There are some wealthy business people. Leaders in this movement get speaking fees. Documentaries are made, and in some cases you pay to view the documentary. Funding wise, it's more disparate and disconnected than public health. We spend many, many millions of dollars a year, promoting vaccines. So there's actually much more funding on the side of vaccines. They're a true grassroots movement. They're just like every grassroots movement, they're trying to raise money any way they can. We still don't really understand where a lot of this funding comes from because it's so grassroots.
It's a true grassroots movement. We spend millions and millions of dollars on the pharma side trying to promote the idea that vaccines are awesome, even though they've never been tested for safety. But we really don't know where the funding is coming from. It's like total, true, real grassroots, meaning you. But let's be clear. Joe Smizer wants you to stop supporting the high wire, to stop supporting the legal efforts at ICanDecide.org. Because the millions that pharma is spending and the millions that the New York State, whatever the heck it was called, is spending through PGP and Project Vector is not getting the job done. And frankly, folks, they're admitting it, right? They are going to pour more and more and more millions into trying to thwart us in every state, in every country around the world. And we, the grassroots, you, the people, are the only thing that stands in their way. So I want to point out that we work hard to make it to this top 10 spot. Hopefully one day we'll be at the #1 spot. But clearly we are on the radar, and you have made that possible. And though I honestly, when you watch this video and you watch Joe Smizer sitting on his couch like he's sitting in a dorm room somewhere, I'm not quite sure how talented this guy is, and I don't get a sense that he has a very deep understanding, even though he seems to be selling himself in a really big way to whoever is paying him. What I would love to see you do right now is, can we use Project Vector in this moment right now, and Joe Smizer calling you grassroots people out as something that must be stopped? Can we make this like the biggest fundraising video that's ever been put out? I think that'd be really awesome. You want to spite Joe Smizer. You want to really give it to, the insurance companies and the $200 or $300 million they're bringing in a year to try and stop you. Let's show them that the more you fight us, the bigger we become, which is exactly what Senator Richard Pan did to us back in California. Just go to ICanDecide.org, push on the donate button, and become a recurring donor right now. We're asking for $20 for 2020. You can donate it to the legal fund and all the legal work. We've got lawsuits in New York State right now. We're working on lawsuits going to the International Criminal Court, all sorts of great stuff, not including this amazing show that brings you the truth every single week and great interviews like the one we just did with Dr. Andrew Kaufman. But here's the point. You guys have really been supporting us. It's awesome. We're here. But I am going to be honest with you. You are well short of the $272 million they got on their side, okay? So why don't we do this? Let's make this a rocking, record-breaking weekend on Project Vector's behalf. Please, if you have not donated before and you seem to agree or have been agreeing with the high wire, just $20 for 2020 is what we're asking from those that can do it. If you can only afford $1 a month, then sign up for $1 a month. If you can afford $1,000 a month, then please do that. We are only going to expand our reach, create more programming, and bring more lawsuits, and make sure that they fail over at Project Vector. Please make it possible for me next Tuesday to call Joe Smizer and say, Joe, I just want to thank you for your incredible videos and your dynamic personality, because it helped us raise more money than we ever have in 7 days. Why don't you help me do that? That would be awesome. Obviously, it's going to a good cause, and it's a pretty heavy lift we got going on here against the entire pharmaceutical institution that is trying to take all of your freedoms away. Anyway, I hope you'll join me in this little game. And by the way, if you're already a recurring donor, maybe just add like $1 more a month. And if you all do that, it's going to be a really good week. All right. Thank you for all of your support, everybody that has been. And for those of you that are just going to do it for the first time, welcome to being a part of changing the world. That's what we're attempting to do here on the High Wire. How are we doing it? By being transparent about the truth, transparent about the science. Any questions, ideas that come up in this show, All you have to do is type in ICAN right now in your comments if you're watching on Facebook, and we'll provide all the science and the background to our discussions here and the articles. And if you really want a thorough layout, literally, of every link that helped us put this show together, every single recurring donor gets a newsletter on Monday right after the previous Thursday show, where you can now share those links and the actual science that we're presenting with your friends and those that you know that you're trying to wake up. Well, how does Project Vector work, right? Essentially what he's saying is we have to get more people involved. We have to hand tools to the people so that they can fight their family members and their friends. We can't just leave it to doctors, is what he said. We cannot expect the health officials to do this all on their own. Project Vector is going to attempt to really isolate who we're up against and then hand, people that are pro-vaxxers the ability to fight these battles. And it makes you wonder, what are they really inspiring there? Are they inspiring people to attack those that question vaccines or vaccine hesitant? Are they inspiring people to make death threats? Are they inspiring hate for people that Project Vector does not agree with? Are they going to use terms like misinformation, even though the WHO said that that's actually not true? Will it get worse than that? What are we turning this world into, and what is Project Vector a part of? I think that was brought into real question over the last, couple days and weeks, especially since a known celebrity decided to get involved in the masks discussion. Take a look at this. Joe Biden puts out the tweet, "Wear a mask." Actress Lee Allen Baker says, "No, thank you. It's not law, just an overreaching suggestion, but you do you," right? Seems innocuous enough. Well, she came under massive attack. All sorts of hating tweets and even articles like these. The Good Luck Charlie mom is an anti-vaxxer and anti-masker. Also, Disney Channel fans are canceling Amy Duncan from Good Luck Charlie after a tweet from Lee Allen Baker. Well, I am proud to have with me right now Star, Charmed, Will and Grace, Good Luck Charlie, who is now a brave superhero being presented on the High Wire. Welcome, and thank you for joining me, Lee Allen Baker.
Oh my gosh, Del, I'm so relieved to be finally speaking out and sharing my story. I've been one of the silent people with injured children who have hidden behind you, rooting you on for years. And it's time that I stand beside you because, my children are worth protecting, and I just want to say thank you.
You're very welcome. Lee Allen, first of all, I want to congratulate you. I think you're the first official person to be called an anti-masker and an anti-vaxxer in the same headline. You beat me there.
Well,
I don't know how you did it.
I'm a bit of an overachiever. I don't know if you know that about me, but I say go big and go home, right?
Absolutely. So, you got involved. You've put out tweets, about masks. You've been stating your opinion about, I would call these draconian measures. How has the response been? I mean, I saw some really ugly tweets that, reference wanting to see you and your children dead, buried in the ground, all sorts of really horrific, violent, let's just say, discussions.
Yeah, they have wanted, they want us all to get COVID and die, for sure, and then to be beaten and,
Do you think the media is pushing people to this level of hatred, to be responding in ways that, I mean, these aren't just disagreements, these are violent statements made towards you. Do you think this would just naturally happen, and do you think that they feel like they're supported and okay in making statements like that?
Some of these statements I feel are from bogus sites because they're new sites that have no followers and are following like 6 people. So I'm definitely being targeted, probably, by this gentleman you were referring to earlier and their little campaign. Other times I'm a little bit nervous. In fact, I do want to request that people's names are removed because I sometimes feel that there are kids and teenagers who think that they're fighting a good fight and they don't know any better. And they think they're standing up for justice. And I don't want this to haunt them because they're young and they don't know. And I don't want them to get in trouble. I know that sounds weird because they've wished me to die. But, you know, these are kids that I don't want to get in trouble too sometimes.
Why, you know, what inspired you to, I mean, you have to know. I mean, it's not lost on you. I know other celebrities that talk to me and say, I'm really trying to get up the courage to come out and speak. We've watched Rob Schneider make some brilliant statements, but then get attacked in the media. Of course, you know, we've got Jenny McCarthy. So there's this road out there that as any actor, I think you have got to look at it and say, I know what I'm about to get into. Or did you? You know, how did you make that decision that I want to start speaking my truth?
I've always been a person who wants to speak my truth. And when your kids are almost killed by this and the doctors know it, and then your governor of the state of California, Governor Newsom, passes a law to take away my children's medical exemptions, it's like we're in the end game. And I've got no choice. I didn't want to move out of California, but quite frankly, I feel like they have a loaded gun against my children's head. I didn't want them to be vaccine injured. This is not fun for me. I get nothing out of this that is good, nothing. I have children who will pay the price for the rest of their life for a decision that I made. I will forever regret that. I will forever regret that.
When you put out these posts,
but there comes a point where I have to speak out about it, right? Yeah. It doesn't do me any good to hide. People, you know, our government officials, they speak out and they say there is a certain group of people who will get injured from this. Bill Gates has said there will be risks associated with the COVID-19 vaccine, so we need full indemnity from liability. That's his quote. Okay, wow. Well, I'm not willing to murder my children for the greater good. I'm just not going to do it. I'm not going to do that, right? So it's now time to speak up, specifically with this one vaccine. And like I said, this is nothing that I wanted. I wish this weren't my story, but it is. And so it's time to speak up and protect my kids and my family.
You know, it's amazing to me, and I've obviously interviewed thousands of parents of vaccine-injured children, and we watched Bill Gates talk about the greater good and this accepted casualty. They know there's injuries they don't like talking about. They know there's deaths. They don't like talking about it. But I find it shocking that they don't celebrate those that have made the sacrifice to the greater good, people that did believe in the program, that did end up having their children be injured, maimed, sometimes for life. And I think that's why it's so important when people like you speak out that really do have a voice and a visibility, because there are so many silenced mothers and fathers and grandparents out there going through an incredibly difficult situation.
Yes,
and we don't celebrate them when we should. If we really believed in this, we should at least say, you're heroes. Thank you for putting your soldiers on the front line for the rest of us.
It didn't work out for us. Yes, thank you for trying. It did not work out for us. But that's the point, is that they don't want to celebrate that. It's like if we lose even one person to COVID, that is one person too many. But if we lose all these people to the vaccine, oh, well, then that's okay. That's for the greater good. Yeah, I'm not singing that song anymore. Not when it's my kids' lives hanging in the balance. You know, and what they want to do is pit us against one another, right? They want to do anti-mask versus mask, anti-vax versus vax, black versus white, Democrat versus Republican. This is all in an election year to get us to focus on hating one another, so we don't focus on what all the politicians are doing to us.
That's absolutely right. Well stated. When you put out this, and look, we put out the tweets, you're there. I don't want to just talk about the negative. Obviously, you're speaking for what we just heard is an enormous and growing movement. Did you also get positive responses from your tweets and speaking out?
I will say that I got way more positive responses than I did negative. And I got responses from children who have been vaccine injured that, my children are young, but like there are children that are teenagers that have platforms now that they themselves have been injured and are able to send me a message saying, thanks, I can't walk since having my vaccine, and thank you for speaking out for us. And I haven't been able to do this, that, or the other since my vaccine injury, and thank you for speaking out for me, and thank you for standing up for me.
Are you worried this is going to affect your career?
I will probably not be working again. Of course, it's going to. Disney Channel is not going to hire me because my children were injured. And I was very naive about this. I thought that people would have compassion for the bad luck of the draw on this, really. And there has been none. There has been none. And so, yes, I will probably not work again, except for the fact that there is a really wonderful community out there that is making movies, and I just did one. And these are good-hearted, good-natured people that are interested in the truth of everything coming out. And so I've, developed a really great working relationship with them. I'm just finishing up a movie here in Edmond, Oklahoma. And so hopefully there will be light at the end of this tunnel for me.
I believe there will be, and for those of you that are watching, we're expanding our studio and our work at the High Wire. We want to do more productions, and I actually hope we get to work together. I do see a future with more films, both narrative and documentary, more voices putting out news and talk shows. We are becoming big enough to make a difference, and I think we're big enough, and with the millions and millions of people around the world, I believe that there is an audience out there that has the funds. So again, all of this is what we're a part of, and I want and I hope that you're stepping out and being courageous is being heard by the other actors and directors and producers and people of Hollywood that are either suffering at home with your injured children or simply aren't vaccinating because you knew Lee Allen and you knew her story and you said, you know what, that's not going to be for me. I agree with you. We are in the end game here. It's the final battlefield. We will either have control over our own bodies or we will not. We will either be the ones that are guiding our children through their lives or they will be government property. I don't think there's any two ways about this. What they're trying to say is we are not human beings. We have no rights to ourselves. We are cattle. We are the herd they're referring to us as, and they consider us public property. I think it's a shame on Disney to not support you. When I think about Sesame Street wants to have an autistic puppet, yet if an actor or an actress comes out to actually talk about what autism is like at home and how it started, then you lose your career. It's so disingenuous.
Yes. And I will tell you, too, that because I know there's going to be a lot of pushback on the autism word, my children do not have autism. My children had very, very specific physical symptoms after every inoculation, culminating in some pretty serious neurological trauma and seizures, and so big that they could not be ignored. And you're right, on Good Luck Charlie, I was very proud that there was an episode that we did where a child with two parents of the same sex were represented. And the reason I was proud of that is because I believe that every child, in whatever situation they're in, deserves to have a voice and have their story told. Mm-hmm. So I was really proud to be a part of this episode about the girl that's got, oh yeah, she's got two moms, no right. Big deal. And yet, oh my gosh, don't you dare mention that a child has been injured or killed by a vaccine. Right. It's just, it's mind-blowing to me that this inconvenient truth is being shoved under the rug and we're being punished and, quite frankly, labeled murderers.
Well, Lee Allen, I think you've made a huge step forward, as so many have, with your courage and your desire to be brave. I think we've taken a giant step just this week in the work that you've done, and I want to thank you. And I want to thank all of the other actors and directors and producers, scientists and doctors that are going to step out and be courageous because you know the truth. We are laying the groundwork for the future world we want to live in. This should all be on the table. These are real discussions. There's real data to be collected, and there's real understanding to be had. We cannot just tell the best case scenario stories, even of that, high functioning Asperger's kid that goes on to be a doctor. There's also the one that does not, the one that will be in diapers for the rest of their lives, and the beautiful parent story that are there supporting those children, or those that aren't dealing with autism in any way, but as you said, have seizures or other major autoimmune or neurological disorders, which have skyrocketed from 12.8% of our children in the 1980s to now 54% of our children. Lee Allen Baker, you are standing up for that gigantic rise in that huge population of children and parents. So for all of them, I'm sure they're with me when I say thank you for your courage, and I look forward to maybe having you come on and talk to us more in the future.
Absolutely. It's been my honor. And, let's do this. We got to stick together and get through this. Thank you.
All right. Sounds good. I'll see you out there. Take care. Thank you for your time. Well, amazing, right? Amazing. Again, the High Wire just keeps presenting you with heroes. Are you ready to do it? Are you ready to step out? Are you ready to make a difference? What has to happen to your life so that you finally say, you know what? I got nothing left to hide. I certainly have nothing left to gain. I better just step up and do something. Well, there's probably no greater representation of that than Dr. Andrew Wakefield, who, of course, was that famous scientist that first looked at some children, listened to a mother's story, much like Lee Allen Baker, that was saying, my child appears to have been injured after a vaccine. There's something wrong with their intestinal system. Will you look at their intestines, and you've studied Crohn's disease. And that's what Dr. Andrew Wakefield said, well, I know Crohn's disease. I don't know anything about autism, so I think you're talking to the wrong person. Of course, you've heard the story. You know that truth. And a lot of that was shared. But Dr. Andy Wakefield's, entire career was brought to its knees, crashing down by an attack by the medical establishment in the UK, and of course by the Sun Times and Brian Deere, a reporter that just set out to make up a crazy and wild story that medical people listen to. But Andy Wakefield didn't stop there, right? He didn't stop the removal of his license. Instead, he said, you know what, if we have the media that's attacking this idea and attacking these parents, someone has to become the media. And so he set out and changed a career course, right, to become a heroic filmmaker, to bring the truth through media since no one else was doing it. That incredible journey led him to make multiple documentaries, and specifically the one I got involved with as a producer. Of course, I'm talking about Vaxxed, which at the center of it is the whistleblower, Dr. William Thompson. Vaxxed went on to be an incredible sensation around the world. Our co-producers went on to make Vaxxed 2. Well, Andy Wakefield has just come out with a brand new film.
Ford Motor Company introduced the Pinto. It was a small car with a big problem. Ford was accused of causing up to 900 burn deaths because they were unwilling to spend just $11 per vehicle for a safer gas tank.
The behavior of the vaccine manufacturers is identical. If we kill kids, it's going to cost us $500,000. If we don't kill kids, it's going to cost us $1 million. Here's how much we have to price our vaccine at. I found the Pinto memo for vaccines. Less than a cent per dose to make it safer. And they were unwilling to cut into their profit margin.
So 1963 was the earliest they knew they could make a safer vaccine?
No, it wasn't.
The fact is, we may have had a safer shot a long time ago.
Are you kidding me? 60 years before the safer vaccine was actually licensed?
And they would tell the public, the judges, congressmen, and their senators,
you need to protect us from vaccine injury lawsuits.
The present DTP vaccine is the safest that medical science can now provide.
Liar.
One of the biggest intimidation tactics I've ever seen a company do in this country.
A blackmail of Congress.
If they knew they could make it safer and chose not to, then a jury trial would be disastrous.
With the passage of the act, The 90s opened up an entirely new era for vaccination.
The court's decision has granted an immunity to drug manufacturers not afforded to any other industry.
No liability.
Promotes riskier products.
The agencies that are supposed to protect Americans from dangerous drugs have all become sock puppets for the industry that they're supposed to be regulating.
There's something very wrong here when we're mandating a vaccine and we don't even know how many children are being injured.
Marty asked what we're going to do about vaccination.
Kids can't go to school without their shots.
In the wake of the 86 Act, the vaccine schedule ramped up dramatically.
It's a $52 billion industry.
And there were more and more vaccine injuries, and the name given to that injury was autism.
Injured children started getting compensated in large numbers.
And then bad things started to happen.
I still think it's a no-brainer.
Well, of course, that was the trailer for the brand new film by Dr. Andrew Wakefield called The Act. And I am now joined by that man that ruined my life, that got me into the middle of all this mess, Dr. Andy Wakefield. You know, this is an incredible film. And when I was watching it, and I was thinking about the fact that one of the talking points I had very early on was, you know, when I met someone new with the issues around vaccines, you know, I would get, you know, you always want to make the point, you realize there's no liability, that we took liability away from this product back in 1986. And, you know, my friends and people that I've talked to will say, well, I mean, doesn't that mean, aren't they admitting right there must be a problem if they had to protect it from liability? But then you get all of these talking points, right? I mean, I've got this sea of talking points. We've won lawsuits, and I found myself getting further and further away from ever using that point. And it was fairly recently that, you know, I was talking to somebody, a politician who, you know, said they'd been through this all before, and I brought up the liability. I said, well, you know, and they don't have any liability. They said, what do you mean? I said, what do you mean what I mean? They're like, well, what do you mean no liability? I said, well, because the 1986 Act. And they said, I don't know what that is. And it just made me realize that we get so used to using these talking points, but so few people actually know the history of what happened with vaccinations. So let me just ask you, you know, why the Act? I mean, you know, coming out of Vaxxed, this is a film now you've been working at a couple of years. Why was this the story you wanted to tell?
Well, just on that point about the politicians, remember Joe Biden the other night in the Democratic candidacy debate saying, imagine if I got up here and said we give indemnity to the pharmaceutical companies.
Imagine if I stood here and said we give immunity to drug companies, we give immunity to tobacco companies. That has caused carnage on our streets.
Well, that's exactly what we do, Joe. And so I want to present this film to you in several ways, Del, but you're absolutely right. What it is about what happens when you take an industry or a series of products out of the free market, out of the constraints of the free market. That a product that is bad or unsafe is allowed to survive in the market because you provide it with a protected niche. And that's exactly what's happened here. And you and I know, Del, that the free market operates in such a way that if a product is good, then it will float to the surface and it'll succeed and the company will thrive. But if it's bad, then it'll sink to the bottom and the company will either have to change or improve. Otherwise, right, they'll perish. And that, when you take a product away from the constraints of the free market, in this case, by taking away liability for damage done by their vaccines from the vaccine makers, then you've got a really bad situation. And that bad situation becomes a nightmare when you then mandate those unsafe products. You make it compulsory for every child in the country, and now with politicians around the world making it compulsory for every child in the world. Then you've got a real nightmare. You've got a perfect business model for the industry because they have no liability and a mandated market. And then the next level that really makes it a catastrophe is when the industry and the government agencies act together to disable the systems that are put in place to monitor safety, the checks and balances that identify and correct the problems with the vaccines, then you have a real storm on your hands. And that is exactly where we are now. And just when you thought it couldn't get any worse, then we're getting into a situation where we're faced with mandatory, not just childhood vaccination, but mandatory adult vaccination for every person in the world for COVID-19. And so it could not come. In many ways, this film couldn't come, although this was never planned in this way, at a more opportune time where more people in the world are aware of this issue and are expressing concerns. But historically, they didn't know whether vaccines caused autism and didn't care. But when it comes to them, when it comes to forcing me to having a vaccine, or I can't travel, or I can't live, or I can't operate in society, that's a different matter. So suddenly, we've got a lot of people paying attention. It's a very interesting situation.
You know, what I think was great about the film is you've got two audiences out there. Now, of course, I know you, like I, and all of us, I think the number one goal is to cast a wider and wider net and enroll more and more people into the truth. And in your film, you're following a couple as they're trying to come to the truth and understand, you know, are they going to vaccinate their child, which was a powerful device and a very smart device, I thought, in that it really centers the film for those of us that have been those parents. Like, how are we going to make that choice and where do we look? You know, but when you think about the film and, you know, on one hand, you have people that will be brand new looking at it. What I found surprising, I have to tell you, is I thought I knew everything. I know you're saying that's the people don't know the real Dell, but you know, I really thought I had a grip on the 86 Act, vaccine court, and these things. And I have to be honest, the way you put it together, I finally understood some of the blocks of what got us here that I honestly had not really understood. You had the brilliant lawyer that I didn't realize that had won cases and been in vaccine court that was taking us through as the legal system started falling apart and falling between their fingertips. And even the idea that for a moment, the act looked like it was creating a space where we could get to the truth. And then, of course, it just collapses in. And you're right, when you think in this moment, it's so important to see how the corruption took place, because when I think people see that mirror to the corruption they're all witnessing with their own eyes, this vaccine being rushed with no safety studies, and, you know, Bill Gates, you know, being audacious enough to say, well, of course, some people will be injured. That's why this product will have to be protected from liability. And of course, they're talking about a new liability outside of the 86 Act. The PrEP Act now is going to be protecting everybody. I mean, essentially, a doctor can go in and shoot you in a hospital right now, and as long as they can say it was COVID-19, they can say, we're just trying a new approach, and they're indemnified. It's shocking where this is going. But when you think about this time, you started making this movie, and, you know, over, you know, almost 2 years ago, right? I mean, or more, you know, what were you picturing would be your audience compared to what you now see as your audience? Again, it's the moment. It feels like the waters parted once again, Andy, and you are hitting this at an incredibly important time.
Well, it's really interesting to say that, because when I was here, we had a story of what was really the conception, the birth, and the imminent demise of this act. But it was a really tedious story, Del. It was a story of legislation and litigation and medical science. And even the most ardent fan of this sort of story, this kind of thing, would be asleep in 10 minutes. How did you tell this story in a way that was engaging, had people sitting forward in their seats, had them entertained first, and then educated second? Because you and I know that's what filmmaking is about. If you can't get your audience engaged, forget it. It's over. So I was struggling with this, and I was at a pop-up fundraiser one night in LA, and there was a celebrity couple there. And they said, we've got to get behind this film. We've got to do everything we can to help. And I thought, how can you help? Oh, yeah, you can donate money, but actually, how can you help? And I suddenly thought in that moment, I know. You can tell this story. You can be Mr. and Mrs. and you're having your baby and you are going through the kind of debate, the kind of discussion, the kind of friction that families are going through, couples are going through all over the world right now, whether they're new parents or parents who are having their first baby or grandparents. This is something that's on everybody's mind. And you are the ones who represent us. You are us. We now in the audience, we care about you. You care about your story, the outcome, the arc of your story, because the outcome for you is the outcome for us. And you go on that journey. And this couple are the ones who identify the discovery documents from that lawyer you were talking about that have never been seen by anyone before.
Yeah.
They go on the journey, and it's really a story in its essence. You know, in these dark times, Del, when we're getting so much conflict and bad news, it's really at the core of this story, for me, about the power, the extraordinary power of maternal intuition. It's about that little voice inside that woman that says there is something wrong here. There is something about this that is not right. And you, buddy, you who may not have this intuition, if you're going to be fit to be my husband and the father of this child, you're going to get on board. So you have, like every good drama, you have a lot of antagonism in the beginning. You don't have to, what about polio and storming out of the room and kind of thing. You have that conflict. But in the end, the husband trusts in his wife's intuition and he goes on that journey. And then they unravel all the things that I, like you, didn't understand about the act, its consequences, both intended and unintended, those extraordinary consequences that made the industry, the vaccine makers, so powerful, so wealthy, that they could buy politicians, that they could buy the media, that they could buy the medical profession, they could own the whole thing because they made so much money. And it was all based upon a lie. And what this film exposes is that lie. I thought I knew, like everybody else, the basis for why the act came into being in the first place. Oh no, I didn't. When we got the discovery documents from Mike Hugo, then it all fell into place. It was extraordinary. And it's that couple who represent us in this film, going on that journey and making that discovery, that then made it relatable, understandable, and far more engaging.
Well, I think the way it's laid out, I think one of the great things that I love about The High Wire is those couples that walk up to me, and oftentimes the same story, much to what you alluded to there, where, a young mother will say, I didn't want to vaccinate, I wasn't vaccinated, but my husband was fighting me the same way. And, then they saw you on The High Wire, they saw The High Wire, or they saw Vaxxed, or something that we've done, enrolled that husband that doesn't come from that same place, right? Doesn't come from that intuitive space, has to see the data, has to see the details, has to understand, you got to make this make sense. Whereas women, I think the beauty is there's an understanding that transcends, sort of what we need in a story or in facts, and they really intrinsically know when something's right and wrong. We don't have that ability, and I think this movie is going to help those couples and will be great that way. So when we talk about right now, it's been released. Obviously, the big concern, just prior to you getting this out there, we watched Plandemic, being shut down in platforms all over the place. Where is it people can find this film, and what do you need from us to keep it going, even if there is censorship as it's now starting its journey out into the world?
Well, it's interesting, Dale. You and we almost crave censorship now, given the experience at Tribeca. You say, right. Yes, thank you very much. That's free marketing right there. But it's become so draconian. They're doing every single thing they can to shut this down. Forget the First Amendment. That doesn't matter. We want to kill this, but it won't work. And you and I know it won't work. And the great thing about it is that in the face of this kind of censorship, in the free market, there are people sitting there who are saying, I've been developing a new platform for the last 10 years. Thank you very much, Zuckerberg, because you've just given me an opportunity that I didn't have before. You've just censored yourself, in effect. And so what's happened is there are two, it's going to be playing on 1986theact.com, 1986theact.com. Go there to watch this film. It is also translated into French, German, Russian, Italian, and Hispanic Spanish, show for the Hispanic community within America and South America. Then it will be freely available to you. Please go to that platform, or go to, if you want a community experience, go to sphere.io, sphir.io, and watch it there. So that's where it can be seen. I've no doubt there'll be efforts to stop people watching it, but we are protected and we have plans in place to mitigate attempts to stop people accessing it. So, and then it will come out on DVD. People still love DVDs. They like to have a hard copy. They don't want to trust in the sort of amorphous thing out there where it may disappear at any moment. So yeah, so any help that you can give us, Del, with getting this out to your huge and growing audience would be absolutely marvelous. People need to see it. I'm sure they do not want people to see it, but really the value of it is that in understanding where we are going right now with COVID, is we need to look into the past. We need to look into the history of our experience with this sort of reaction to pandemics. And this is worse than ever before. And it's always been catastrophic before. So how is this going to play out? But we can understand where we're going if we understand where we've come from with this act, and what the truth is. And people will, what we're also doing is putting all the documents that are not in the public domain, those discovery documents from the courts that have never been seen before, we're putting those on the website so people can go there and they can look at them and they can do their own fact checking, because I think that's very important. No doubt the allegations will come as they did with Vax, that this was all contrived, all made up by you and me, when we in fact know that every word of it was absolutely true.
Yeah. Well, I think you're right. I think as we march into this crazy moment, I mean, you know, we're watching even Paul Offit seems to be afraid of his own people in this vaccine coming. That shows you how terrified some of these people have built a monster that's now gotten out of their control. But what is that monster, and what is that platform they're standing on, and we're all going to be standing on as we fight this? I think the act is, you know, it's 1986, the act. I think that this film really helps us understand our history, the foundation, the legal system around this, especially in the United States of America. But for people in every other country, we are leading the way. You have to know how they're getting away with it here. We will not be able to break this juggernaut if we don't understand what we're up against. And that's why I think your film is so important. So lastly, Andy, you know, you've been at this. You're a pioneer. You've been through so much. That question I'm sure you get all the time. How do you do it? How do you stay so passionate? Putting films together is exhausting, you know, and all of the work that goes into it. You know, how do you keep going, and why? Why are you could have walked off in the sunset at any point. Why take, you know, the continued assault and ridicule and fight? You know, what keeps you going?
Del, I watch The High Wire. If I need a little boost, I just watch The High Wire. Get up and go. No, absolutely. And you know, the truth is that it's essential. You and I have talked about this, but you look at that child with autism and you think, I don't have a problem. That child has a problem. I don't have a problem, so get on with it. Get over yourself. And I realized a long time ago, this isn't about me. It's not about me at all. It's about something far more important. So it doesn't matter what they say about you. It doesn't matter one bit. And I know you share these sentiments. You get on with the job because it is the right thing to do. And it's been a privilege doing it. I wouldn't change anything. I wouldn't change it for the world. I now love making films. And one of the things that's come out of all of this is that people have come to me with extraordinary stories, documents from the industry, from government, and said, we've done something bad, here is the evidence. And so there are many stories to be told, and you and I know the power of film, and film can change everything. Vax changed everything. It changed the dynamic of this whole process, and now the time has come. You've done a fantastic job with what you've done. The VAX2 team have done a wonderful job there.
Yeah.
This is my contribution to our effort.
Well, Andy, it's an incredible contribution. It continues to be. Your effort, I think, will go down in history. One day the world will know. We lost a great scientist when we lost you, but we gained a great filmmaker, and that has been made clear here. So everyone get out, support this film, get it to everyone you know. Everyone we got to understand how we got here. We've got to know what's going on. So once again, it's sphere.io. That's SPHIR.io. We'll be streaming the film, and 1986theact.com. Is that right? 1986theact.com.
Absolutely.
Definitely get out, share this with everyone you know. It's another tool, right? They keep calling it the media empire they're up against. Vaccine hesitancy is growing. No, people are just getting smart. They're getting the truth. And Andy, you have been at the forefront of bringing that truth. So I thank you for all the people out there that I know have supported you for so long. Of course, always I thank you for having transitioned my life into, what I'm so grateful to be a part of a life that I get to be passionate and truthful and not controlled by sponsors. So, and I obviously, Vax and that work that we did together will always be cherished. This is a great film, Andy. I think it's going to have massive success, and I wish you all the best.
Dale, thank you very much.
All right, take care. Thank you for taking the time. I'll see you out there on the road. Well, I mean, what an incredible show. I mean, it's just, sometimes I've just got to pinch myself and say, this is happening. Dell, you're in the middle of this. You got Lee Allen Baker joining you. We have actors, movie stars, people, directors stepping up, telling the truth. Dr. Andrew Kaufman shedding light on what may be the future of science and medicine. Maybe we are going to see the end of germ theory, or maybe it's a combination in between, but obviously really compelling thoughts that I think expand our mind and are going to help us move into a new future. I'm really hopeful that out of this terrible, terrible, dark, depressing moment we find ourselves in, I've referred to it oftentimes as birth. I think we're giving birth to something beautiful. More films, more television, more help, more support, more directors, more actors, people stepping up. They've done this to themselves, right? The liars have done this to themselves. They should never have passed an SB 277. You should have left everyone alone in California, Gavin Newsom, oppressing us, shutting us down, lying and pushing forward agendas that make no sense to anyone with brain cells. We didn't do that. It's a gift, actually. I think we have to see it as a gift. Look at how many brilliant people are just finding their way onto the high wire. Look how many of you are being fulfilled by being a part of the high wire and supporting the high wire. We got more awesome scientists, more stories coming up in the episodes in the future. I am so honored and proud to be a part of Informed Consent Action Network, the nonprofit that supports us, that you support. You are that action. You are that network, and you are the reason we keep bringing you and being able to bring this dynamic programming and these amazing, brilliant, brave heroes from around the world. This is the High Wire. We're excited to be here, and I'm excited to see you next week. Thanks for watching, and thank you for being a High Wire insider. Be sure to share this show with your friends on Facebook, YouTube, Periscope, and Instagram, because knowledge is power, power is freedom, and we need all we can get.